Hank Pym has had a pretty terrible life. We've talked about it before, but some of the points of note include him creating Ultron, becoming physically violent with his then wife Janet Van Dyne, and spiraling out of control to the brink of near suicide. But hold on, go back. That one, yeah. Did that really happen? Welcome to Comic Misconceptions, I'm Scott. Hey, Hank, didn't know you were here.
I've been watching you for a while now.
That's, Alright, Marvel's Ant-Man is a movie that I will be watching this week, maybe you will be too, and when I was thinking of topics to do for this video, I remembered something quite a few of you brought up on the last Ant-Man video I did almost 2 years ago when I looked like this. It's a story of Hank Pym hitting Janet Van Dyne. Did this infamous panel happen on purpose, or was it completely accidental? First, let's back up a little bit, get some context here. Hank Pym was a founding member of the Avengers as Ant-Man along with Janet Van Dyne, aka the Wasp. The two would later get married under some bizarre circumstances that I'm not going to get into, but in Avengers number 12, or 212 rather, from 1981, we see the Avengers attacking a villain known as the Elf Queen. They eventually get her to stop fighting, but Hank Pym, who is currently going by his Yellow Jacket alias, attacks her anyway. In the next issue, he faces a court-martial for his actions, and is temporarily suspended from the Avengers until the team can reach a decision. Hank knows that he's basically already been kicked off the team. The court-martial is simply a formality that's going to drag everything out, but he uses this time to his advantage. Hank locks himself away in his lab and creates a robot named Salvation 1, which he plans on unleashing against the Avengers during the court-martial. Sal, which is Hank's nickname for the robot, was designed to be unstoppable, except for one weak spot that only Hank would know about. He wanted to stage a triumphant victory. He would make it seem like some random robot busted into Avengers Mansion and started attacking everybody, and then, when defeat appears imminent, Hank would blast Sal in its weak spot, shutting it down, saving the day, and proving his worthiness to the team. But Wasp finds out about his plan and begs him not to go through with it. Hank yells at her to shut up as he violently strikes her across the face. He believes that there is no other way. He has to do this. It's his only chance at redeeming himself. At the court-martial, he tries defending his actions he took against the Elf Queen, and even starts attacking Captain America personally, saying that Cap is only upset because he thought Elf Queen was a beautiful woman. If it were anybody else, this wouldn't be such a big deal. But Janet pleads with Hank, just let it end and accept the consequences. She even reveals her black eye caused by Hank's outburst earlier. The other Avengers see this and are in shock. Hank decides that there is no other option but to release Salvation 1. But remember, Wasp already knows about this plan and quickly fills everybody in. Not only that, but it is she who ends up shutting down the robot, saving the day instead of Hank. Hank knows that he has lost. He quickly leaves, knowing that his days as an Avenger are over. And in the next issue, Janet asks for divorce. This was a defining moment in Hank Pym's life. When Hank reveals that he has bipolar disorder in Avengers AI number 5, Marvel released a video to go along with it where they got a psychiatrist to explain what bipolar disorder is. In the video, they cite this entire story of the excessive violence towards the Elf Queen, the creation of Salvation 1, and of course the hitting of Wasp as an example of his illness. They even brought it over to the world of the Ultimate Comics in Ultimates number 6 from 2002, when we see Hank and Janet getting into a shouting match that erupts when he strikes her. This fight was taken much further and ended up with Janet being hospitalized, leading to Cap taking Hank down a short while later. The senior vice president of publishing of Marvel Comics, Tom Brevoort, once said, quote, "We've spent years trying, but the audience will not forgive Hank Pym for striking the Wasp. That's the moment in that character's history that looms the largest and probably will forever." He goes on to say, quote, "Part of that is because that was the most interesting thing that had ever happened to that character, and so that really cemented it. Any number of creative teams since then have struggled mightily trying to get that moment to be overcome, including myself, and nobody's been able to outperform the gravity of it." So you get the idea. This wasn't just some moment in Hank's career. This was the moment. But it wasn't supposed to be. Avengers number 213 was written by Jim Shooter, who has a blog over at jimshooter.com, naturally. In 2011, he finally set the record straight about this seminal issue. He noted that before he started writing the Avengers, he went back and read everything that Hank Pym and Janet Van Dyne had ever appeared in and noticed a trend. Hank's career was filled with failure at every turn. He was never particularly good at being a superhero, and his scientific achievements tended to lead to disaster. And then you have Janet, who seemingly succeeded at everything she tried. While on a 5-hour flight, Shooter just so happened to be sitting next to a psychologist, so they started discussing the storyline that he had in mind and the sort of toxic relationship between Hank and Janet. The psychologist said Shooter's story made total sense given their history, so he wrote it up. But the original intent for this scene where he strikes Jen was meant to be shown as an accident. It wasn't supposed to be Hank intentionally striking her across the face with full force, but rather just an unfortunate mistake on Hank's part. It was meant to be shown as him throwing his hands up in frustration and accidentally hitting her in the face. Bob Hall, the artist for that issue, explains that there were a few things that may have led to him interpreting Shooter's writing the way he did, creating this infamous scene. First and foremost, Hall didn't really like the story in that issue. It was sort of early in his career, and he just wanted to draw the Avengers in action instead of a character-driven story about a mental breakdown. And that brings up another point. Hall was relatively new at this. At this point in his career, he refers to himself as just a fan with some skill, also saying that it would not have been possible for him to draw the panel precisely how Shooter wanted it. He even remembers redrawing that particular panel several times because he could never get it to look quite right. By the end of it, he thought he might as well make it Marvel action because that's what he knew how to draw. Another point I think is important is that Shooter was using the Marvel method of synopsis writing. Essentially, this is when you give the artist a loose plot to work with, and then you let them draw whatever they felt was best to fit this story. This meant that Shooter probably didn't give a lot of direction to Hall about how exactly he should draw that scene. And lastly, Hall admits that he was an extremely slow artist during this time. He was constantly redrawing things over and over. He believes that if he was faster and there was more time, Shooter probably would have asked him to redraw it. And actually, Shooter corroborates this by saying that there was simply no time to have it redrawn. And that's what led to this tragic story that's followed Hank around all these years. It was kind of the perfect storm of situations that led to that scene. It's a little sad maybe, but really interesting to think about that a character can be defined for decades by Jim Shooter sitting next to the right person on an airplane, getting paired up with Bob Hall, who was slow and unsure in his work at the time, and being hit with a rapidly approaching deadline that made it impossible to redraw. And now, it's a part of the character, probably permanently. What do you guys think? Are you a fan of how Marvel has since capitalized on this accidental panel and cemented it as part of Hank's legacy? Or do you think it's an unnecessary piece of his history? Let's talk about it all in the comments below. And let me know what you think about the Ant-Man movie. If you're watching this after it has already come out, then please, no spoilers down there, guys. I have to read all these comments. And if this is your first time hanging out with us here at NerdSync, we make new videos every week that ask questions and examine comics beyond the surface because we believe that doing so can actually enhance your comic book reading experience and make comics just a little bit more awesome than they already are. So make sure you hit that big sexy subscribe button so you don't miss out on anything. Once again, I'm Scott. You can find me on Twitter and Instagram, and I will see you right here on Friday for a tie-in video. It's one that I'm actually kind of excited about, so I'll see you then.